open up the edits we just did, Eva, so we can do that.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody for joining. We need to finalize our charter, and hopefully we've been able to recreate it to where it was, because I noticed that when it may not look exactly as we remember it, but I think we've got it back to where we need it to be. So we have just a little bit of time for that, and then we need to discuss. Kelly has joined us for the discussion around. Now I'm drawing a blank because I don't have the chart or the agenda right.
Background check. You're welcome.
And then we also need to review the quality principles that were sent out. So another packed agenda for us. Never a dull moment at the Equity Implementation Committee. So Carol, jump on in.
Yep. Okay. So we are hoping this won't take very much longer. I know that we're all pretty close to what we feel like the proposed edits to our charge is. So I'm just going to quickly go through what we've made sure it's re-included, because I took a couple things out by accident that I wasn't supposed to. So in the introductory paragraph, we have made sure to say the Equity Implementation Committee is chartered to educate the Early Learning Council on the issues, challenges, successes, and priorities related to implementing the equity recommendations, and those are hyperlinked to the equity recommendations that live on our website. For children and families furthest from opportunity, and then the adoption date. So we wanted to make sure furthest from opportunity got placed back into that first spot. And then Lenny has some comments around just being more explicit around responsive practice, operating system, and data and resource allocation. He had a question about whether we should add a narrative about data in there. I'm don't think we need to get that nitty-gritty in the charter, but I will leave that for you all to decide, not my decision to make. So the standpoints, the three things we wanted to make clear: actualize this information in setting policy for the early learning system, to celebrate diversity, and champion the closure of development, opportunity, and achievement gaps for young children and their families. So we move to the core areas of responsibility. So again, we said, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Excuse me. This is Sue. Can I go back up to number 2, celebrate diversity?
Right.
It seems to me we had come up with a different verb other than celebrate, because several people I think said celebrate isn't really what we want to focus.
Yeah, I was one of the people.
Okay.
Okay, tell me and I'll just write it in as we go.
I can't recall what it was we said, but celebrate was not the word that we thought was
the right word.
Was the right word.
Yeah, I don't know if it's more embrace diversity or, boy, I can't remember.
We had talked about it at the last meeting, and this morning Erica is going to share with us the recording from the last meeting so that we can hear what that was. So I'll listen back to what that was and make sure it's the right one.
Yeah, I think it was in the November meeting, because December we were discussing the...
Right.
Okay, so let me make sure I say November meeting.
So, Carol, will that recording of the meeting be on the website then, or how does one access that? Eva and I were trying to figure that out over the weekend.
I actually don't know the answer to that. I will check with Alyssa to see how they handle the recordings of the meeting.
Okay, and can you let us know? That would be really helpful.
Right.
Sure.
Thanks, Carol.
No
but
problem.
I'm sure Celebrate came out.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and then champion closure of development, opportunity, and achievement gaps for young children and their families. Okay, so core area of responsibilities. This is another place that changed a fair amount from the original charter. So A, reviewing the disparities across focus populations and provide feedback for early learning hubs and ELD staff. Lenny had mentioned that maybe he had wanted to include community groups in that, but I think this is pretty early learning division specific, so I wasn't sure if we should put that in. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
Well, I believe we had discussed like inviting community, conversations with community partners too, and specifically we had interests around that, or I have interests, I'll be clear, and I think I was supported from others that the specific example of preschool promise was done, but didn't have the equity lens really applied or thought through. So when possible, inviting community partners to bring policies that they will be bringing forward too, knowing that our agendas are always full with division stuff, but I would like to have things discussed beforehand when possible.
Okay, so B, the committee would like to focus on 5 specific domains. Communities furthest from opportunity and policies that affect their ability to thrive. These policies include racial equity policies and implementation practices, specifically Black, Latino, Native American, Asian and Pacific Islander, and those whose first language is not English. Economic equity policies, including those communities in geographic isolation. Families, caregivers, and community partners, voice and influence, workforce composition and quality, community collaboration, resource allocation, and contracting practice. Do those all feel good and familiar? Okay. Advising the ELC and ELD on developing disaggregated data collection standards for early learning grantees, contractors, the early learning workforce, staff, and ELC members.
Carol, it should be advised, not advice, right?
Instead of advice, yeah.
Thank you. There we go.
And Sue, did you have a question about the up above?
Yeah, it seemed, did we not do something that was trying to address the cultural piece and specifically cultural responsiveness, or it seems to me we had quite a conversation about that as well. And I'm not sure where that would fit in. And Joyce, I don't know if you remember being a part of that discussion.
I do.
Yeah, I thought you had input on that.
Yeah, it needs to be included in here. Racial equity policy.
And is cultural responsiveness the umbrella term that we're using in general?
I am not sure where the cultural responsiveness would make.
Was it up above in the first?
Was it actually, was that the replacement for the celebration of diversity was more about cultural responsiveness?
I think so.
That might have been, yeah.
We have with a focus on culturally responsive practice, operating systems, and data resource allocation.
Right.
So I think that is where that conversation landed.
I just when we talk about 5 specific domains, aren't we going to want to make sure that those words are somewhere in that?
Yeah. So as I'm looking at it, and unfortunately I don't have access to my notes because I am at home,
Right.
racial equity policies and maybe culturally responsive implementation practices, which would cover everything.
Oh yeah, I see. So Carol went down. These policies include racial equity policy, racial equity and culturally responsive policies. That makes sense.
Well, culturally responsive implementation practices, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Ignore the spelling on this one.
Okay.
I mean, what I mean by that is people who can watch me typing, I will spell check this. Oh, wait, I'm just double writing what Augie says. Culturally responsive policies and implementation practices. Okay.
Great.
You're welcome. Okay.
Now, wait a minute, Carol. What did you just say?
I said, okay, so back to the 5 domains. So we've said communities furthest from opportunity and policies that affect their ability to thrive. That's the first domain. These policies include racial equity and culturally responsive policies and implementation practices, specifically Black. Is that it? Did I get it? Okay, we
hit it.
Nailed it. Thanks, guys. Let me hit save before something bad happens. Okay, here we go. All right. So we'll move back down to letter D, which is advise the ELC and ELD on developing a consistent approach for listening to communities, incorporating feedback, and vetting resulting action and ensuring perspective from underserved communities that are regularly heard at ELC meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I knew that was a big one as well. Okay. So on to the next part.
Sorry. Can we go back, Carol, to that one? Does it make sense to say are regularly heard at ELC meetings? It doesn't seem to me that fits there. I mean, we're saying advise us on those things. So I don't think that's the correct grammatical sentence. I mean, to be parallel construction with the others, it would just end after underserved communities, period.
Advise the ELC and ELD on developing a consistent approach for listening to communities, incorporating feedback, setting resulting actions, and ensuring perspectives from underserved communities are regularly heard at ELC. If we ended at communities, then it's not a full sentence.
And I think what we were trying to get to is that I think there was a desire from the committee to have some sort of report back that was maybe more than just a written, submitted report, but have some sort of like regular check-in at meetings. Is that correct?
I think that was the goal, was to make sure we were having perspectives from community groups, parents, providers that we don't typically get at council meetings, and that was part of our goal, was to make sure that there is a process for that happening. I think that was the heart of that letter on this list.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
If that's okay with everybody. Okay. Okay, so the next area, advise the ELC on the following policy areas in accordance with the strategies and tactics adopted in the 2015-2020 strategic plan. These changed a little bit. Identify and analyze service disparities for focused populations by hub. Again, establish metrics and monitor progress towards becoming a culturally responsive organization and policy body in 9 domains.
So
Organizational.
Can we just move these down as like further work out the? I'm trying to scroll. So
Yeah, we did. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so because a lot of it repeats what we've
already talked about.
Right. So this was when I was reading through that, I couldn't remember what we had done with this area.
Right. And we can change the parts that say service voice again to family caregivers and community partners voice, just for consistency in the document.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is just a repeat of before. And then the review for grant making and request for proposals. This one was a little complicated isn't the right word, but what is it that we want from the reviews of grant makings and RFPs from our committee? Right now we say we serve as an advisory to the ELC and ELD in creating the structure for grants and RFPs to avoid unintended barriers for diverse communities in accessing funding opportunities. Our responsibilities include working with program staff to craft a set of RFP/grant application questions for use in all ELC, ELD funding opportunities. Second is we review specific RFPs and grant applications as they're written. Lenny suggested we may want to separate the advice for RFPs so that both the instructions and policies in the RFP and the proposals reflect our equity stance. And then the third part is a member of the Equity Implementation Committee should serve on each RFP or grant award committee and review proposals when they come in. I'm curious about that one because we don't currently do that now, even though it's there. Do we want to leave it and try to make that happen, or do we want to soften it a little as a suggestion?
I was concerned about that one because having been on some of these review committees and the RFPs, that's very time consuming. And I just don't know that,
is there enough due diligence in the first few?
Pardon me?
Is there enough due diligence in the first 2 points that we may not need to have someone serve on every committee?
I'm wondering if we could change the language slightly so that it's still on the table, but that it's up to the discretion of the members of the committee. So maybe that it's that there's an invitation to serve or as time allows, so that we're still included. And because there may be some RFPs that as a committee we decide are really, really important that one of us serves on that review committee. So I don't know what the right language is, but if there would be a way to kind of keep the door open.
So what if we say a member of the Equity Implementation Committee may be allowed to serve during the RFP or grant award committee process as reviewers of proposal as they choose?
As the committee sees fit, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah. I had a question too about this. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, this is Sue. I was just going to say, instead of allowed, how about invited to serve?
And this is Sadie, and I'm wondering if we could go back to the purpose of our involvement, the sort of opening statement on this section. I think that for me it's important, as it's stated, that that our involvement is to avoid any unintended adverse impacts or barriers, but I also to communities of color access and funding. But I also think that part of the reason we need to be involved is to ensure that that the equity criteria in RFP are really strong and clear, and that there's accountability to mainstream organizations who may be applying for funding. So that's not very concise, but you can find a better way to word that, I'm sure.
Right. Ensure the equity, what do we call it? Equity recommendation, sorry.
Equity lens is applied to, or?
This is Carmen. Can you guys hear me?
Hi,
Yes,
Carmen.
ma'am.
Hi. I'm not really comfortable with the change that we're making right now. I'm sorry. I think that my issue with it is that by changing it from that we would be involved to that the committee can decide if we'd be involved, leaves it up to the committee to decide, the council to decide which things they think they need an additional equity lens on. But that our role is to look at everything that's happening with an equity lens, and I think the idea is that the people who are on the equity committee are people who have been selected because they might see challenges to equity in places that others would not see it. They have a strong ability to use that lens. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do.
And I think that there's a lot of unintended misses. Not a lot. There are unintended misses or places where we don't see that something is inequitable. I mean, like, just for example, like the 211 referral call, we've pushed this conversation and pushed it and pushed it and pushed it, and we're finally having it today after the change went into effect in July. That change had a huge impact on the services to children and child care providers farthest from opportunity. That hasn't been discussed yet. So that's something that has already, that's an example to me of something where we already missed it. So it makes me hesitant to remove an equity lens.
Right. That's a good point.
Carmen, are you suggesting then, hi, this is Sadie, hi Carmen.
Hi.
Would you suggest that one of us serve on every RFP committee then? Would you want to go back to that language? Because what I was suggesting, and maybe I wasn't clear, is that the committee, not the council, would decide which processes we wanted a representative at. That there would be some discretion on the equity implementation committee side.
Yeah.
But are you saying that still you'd like it to be consistent and us to have somebody in each one? Is that what you're proposing?
I think that I would be okay with the change in the way that you're proposing it, and I'm understanding it now, as long as we're actually made aware of what, like, everything that's happening. You know what I mean? The way that it's written right now, we would have to be on everyone. So anything that came up, theoretically, somebody would be on that committee. If we change it so that we're deciding which ones to be on, then we have to trust and agree that there's a system to inform us of what's happening so we can make a decision.
Should we add a bullet that is something along the line of every RFP process should be brought as an agenda item to the Equity Implementation Committee? That's sort of what we've been doing now as we've been moving forward, asking our program folks to come to the meetings and talk about what they're working on. Should we just formalize it in a bullet point?
Oh, this is Joyce, and I'll tell you what my concern is. we need to be very clear about whether or not we're going to, the expectations that we be on every committee. I think it could get very messy when we're deciding which, picking and choosing which ones we want to be involved in. The other issue is at some point there may be some people who are sitting around the table who may be submitting an RFP and responding to an RFP. And we just don't want anybody to even suggest that, maybe, we're unduly influencing a process because we're not consistently at the table for all of them, that we're picking and choosing. I just have some concerns. Either we're going to say, yes, we're going to be a part of everything, or we're not. I think one area that we can have influence, which to me would be appropriate, would be in the drafting of the RFP and making sure that the criteria that's identified for selecting proposals is very clear.
Well, and I think, sorry, go ahead, Ms. Joyce.
No, go ahead.
But I hear what you're saying, and I hear also, yeah, I hear everybody's concerns, and I think I agree with what you're saying, is that if we pick and choose, there could be that perception, and then, but I think there's also nothing, if we stay silent on whether or not somebody can be invited to sit on an RFP or grant award committee, it doesn't exclude any of our members from actually being able to do that. They still may be invited to do that as a member of the community. Is that correct, Sue and Carol? So I think if we're silent on it, and I think if we are diligent about making sure that the review, that the application, that we're part of the drafting of the application and grants, then will be covered without that, like, picking and choosing.
Right. So I'm wondering if we, not that I am adding more work to my plate, but if there is a way to build a schedule in which people have to come to the EIC with their policies, RFPs, and grant apps.
Yeah, that's kind of what
because honestly, like I would just say from the staffing side, the specifically around the RFP and the grant process, it moves so glacially, but also sometimes so fast that we don't think about it. So how do we build that in as structure?
So I think, I think we want to be sure and probably change the should to a will be invited. So we're very clear that the EIC will be invited to have a representative. And I go back to the comment several of you made a few minutes ago about the time commitment that it takes to either be on an RFP drafting committee or an award committee. So I just want to make sure that if this is adopted by the committee today and then the council, and we mandate that a committee member be on every one of these committees, the committee can't be held up because nobody has time to do it.
Right.
So
I wonder if the nuance of language around will be invited could be worked with, because if we say will be invited, I can invite Ms. Joyce, but she can decline, or she can. I'm trying to figure out what's the way, and that's why I'm going back to the idea of if you have an RFP, just the way that the folks did for the CCR and RFP, they brought it into us. We had a chance to read it and offer our notes back. And that all happened without anyone having to participate on the committee. I wonder if there's a way to build in that mechanism so that, because there is not enough of us to go around to participate, which goes back to the time commitment. So is there a way to do something like that?
This is Carmen. I think that's a good idea, Carol.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to just make a note here that work on wording around bringing all RFPs to EIC during process. That I can add in as a bullet point. So I'll add that in. Sadie, up at the first paragraph of this grant making and proposal, did I catch your wording correctly around what you wanted to reflect?
Would you read it again, Carol?
Sure. So this is the beginning, the opening paragraph of review of grant making and RFP process. So it says, serve as an advisory to the ELC and ELD in creation and structure of grants and requests for proposals to avoid unintended adverse impacts or barriers for diverse communities, and to ensure the equity lens is applied by organizations when accessing funding opportunities.
Is the by organization, does that mean by applicants?
Yes. So should I just say applicants?
I think so. I think we need to define organization somehow.
And to ensure the equity lens is applied by applicants when accessing funding opportunities. Okay, so I think we are like 3 feet away from being done with this.
And this, and I was going to say, we do have the other things that we have to get to as well. So,
right. So okay, so I'll keep cranking on this one. Maybe by February we'll have this done all the way.
Eva and Carol, this is Sue. I just want to ask one other question. Because that whole part above this review of grant making, the 4.1, which is our kind of strategic plan language, it's basically repeats what we've done above that. So
right,
do
if you want to, we can cut it out we can cut it if you want.
It seems to me
it's repetitive.
We should cut the language, but reference the 4.1 if that's where it is in our strategic plan. So we've got the reference back to the plan, but we don't just repeat all that language.
I'm making my note for that, Sue.
Okay.
Okay. All right, I will do that, Sue. That's a good idea. Thank you. All right, and then I will close this and we can move on. And
then, Carol, you'll send out whatever this final version like.
Yes, ma'am. I will do it.
Okay. And so this is not on our January council agenda. Is that correct? This is going to February?
Yeah, I'll share with Alyssa that we need one more pass to add it. Well, you know what? I'm on a snow day. I will work on this after my presentation this afternoon, and I can get it back to you guys. My commitment will be to get it back to you guys this afternoon. And if we can come to agreement on it, then we can leave it on the January agenda. Is that fair?
Are we allowed to come to agreement over email on things, or is that against public meeting policy for?
I'll check with Alyssa. I'll just check with Alyssa all day on everything I need. Let me check with Alyssa if we can come to agreement.
Because I'm fine with that. I just want to make sure that we're not violating public meeting law.
Right, right.
I'll check with her. If we can't, we'll move it to February and go from there.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So how many RFP or grant award committee are we talking about? What is the general number?
We don't put out. Kelly, are you still on the phone? You have some.
Yes. I would.
What do you think?
That some years there's 0, and some years there's several. So during the, it could be as high as 3 to 5, or it could be none.
Okay. And I raised that question because I'm rethinking and saying, because I guess with me I'm thinking, it's going to be forever. But I'm just thinking about the realistic expectation. Is it a realistic expectation? Given those numbers, I would actually change my thinking about that.
And I think that you are correct in considering the workload, because when we do have one, it's a huge commitment of time.
Yeah, exactly. I know.
Yeah, I know you.
And the other thing that I guess I'm also concerned about, like, I'm co-chair of the House Bill 2716 advisory committee, and we had a presentation from what's her name? The woman who does the grants and the protocols. And one of the things that we were advised as an advisory committee is that we would not serve on the RFP development or the grant award committee and review proposals. So I think it's Carol. Her name is Carol, isn't it? Carol.
I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Yeah, but she came and she made a presentation to our advisory committee. And as a result of that, we did not serve on any RFP development committee. We did have some input. We made some recommendations, but we didn't actually participate in the actual development of the RFP or of the grant awards committee. And I'll tell you, in hindsight, it was a good decision.
So it sounds like the plan to just have folks come before EIC is the right strategy to work through.
Yeah. Okay, so we're 20 minutes behind.
Okay.
So Kelly, you want to jump in with fingerprinting for providers?
Sure. So, Carol, what did you want me to do?
Well, we had a discussion a couple of months ago that folks were concerned, as you already know, about what the process is going to be for the new increased costs for the fingerprints, obviously concerns around folks who are expatriates, as I've started to call them, who are doing child care services, and what the reporting could potentially be or not be, and how that's going to work moving forward.
Sure. I'm just going to start, and you guys can stop me at any point in time to ask questions. And, I want to just start by saying that we have no thought that this is not going to be challenging and an awkward change for our child care provider community. And so I just think we've tried to be as thoughtful as possible within the confines of the requirement. And the first piece I'll say is that, and of course, there's things that are outside of our control. So those things that are within our control, I really think we've tried to be thoughtful. So one piece that is outside of our control is that it is a state requirement that all fingerprinting go through FieldPrint, which is, you know, an organization that contracts with local entities to do fingerprinting. Most of the fingerprinting is done in their like mailboxes, etc. There's only one place I think where it's actually a county building. So what we liked about that is it's, you know, to go into a mailbox place is a little bit less intimidating than going into a police station for most people. There is some concern about the fact that the only way to get an appointment is online for your fingerprinting. And, you know, for a lot of people, it's not an issue. For others who may have language barriers or technology barriers, it is a concern. We've worked with the Child Care Resource and Referral programs throughout the state to provide us, or to provide technical assistance with providers. And so depending on what area they're in, they have a number of different types of supports that they are offering to child care providers. You know, I could put on my camera if y'all want to see me. Pardon?
That would be great. Sorry, I'm talking.
Okay.
That would be great.
Then I have to see what, oh, well, hi everybody. Here, wait, let me close my blind a little bit. The snow's reflecting off my face. Okay. So we've worked actually months with the Child Care Resource and Referral programs to come up with a list of protocols. And one of the things that they are going to be doing with people is helping them with the online piece to get the appointment. The other concern and challenge is the Social Security number. And we have it set up with live or FieldPrint that you do not have to enter a Social Security number to make your appointment or to go through the process. What I've heard is that we had one of the contractors challenge that. And so we're, you know, doing some troubleshooting, but you can go online and enter 9999 if you don't want to use your Social Security number. The other piece of information that we're really, really trying to get out to people is to help them understand that by submitting fingerprints for this background check, that it is only used for identification purposes. So the fingerprints themselves are never kept in the criminal justice system. So the fingerprints are submitted, they go to the Oregon State Police, then they go to the FBI and used for identity purpose and then destroyed. So they're not saved in the system. And so we've been really trying to make sure that people understand that, and it's a real tough one. I mean, we know that people don't, I don't even want to be fingerprinted, and I don't have anything. You know, so that's been one of the pieces we've done. Recently, we also developed some technical assistance documents that are just now ready to go out. We've translated into all the languages that really drill down and provide people with technical assistance on who actually needs to be fingerprinted. And so there's some misconceptions, and we want to make sure that only those who are required by law are actually getting fingerprinted. And an example, you know, parents who come and pick up children from child care obviously don't have to be fingerprinted, but we've created these documents, and I actually sent them to Erica just a few minutes ago, and she will be sending them out to the group so that you can see those documents. And the other piece I'll say is that we intended to start this process January 1st, but we had a little snafu with some of our rules, and it was noticed that the rules didn't quite go far enough, and so now we have to do temporary rules. It feels like, you know, you never can tie anything in a neat little bow in state government. And so we're trying. And so the fingerprinting should start by the 28th of January.
So what were the rules that we had to implement as temporary?
The rules that we implemented as temporary actually changed the definition of who is required to be fingerprinted. What happened was way further down in the rule, there was some other language that was more specific, that said exactly who had to be fingerprinted, and that language did not get changed. So it was noticed way after the fact, and so now that language also needs to be changed. The other problem is that the federal law requires that everyone who is currently in our background registry be fingerprinted by September of 2017, and the changes that we made did not give us the authority. And you know, our lawyer, Department of Justice lawyer, told us afterwards that the language that she'd helped us craft did not cover anyone who was currently in the registry. So we had to expand that language, and so there's folks who may have applied and were in the registry between September and December who will have to go back and print at a later date. You're on camera, honey. My husband just walked in the office. There he is, waving. Okay, Jim, stop. Go away.
For the public record, too. Let him know that.
Oh, I'll tell him afterwards. See, I totally lost my train of thought.
So the Department of Justice said that, so the language didn't cover people who were currently, so somebody who may have renewed in December would have to go back in the way that we drafted the rule, somebody that
did not cover it.
Okay.
Yes.
So the temporary rule takes care of that, so that they're current through the renewal period of what they renewed their CBR.
Right, because right now the statute requires us to do background checks every 2 years. One, it's House Bill 2259 or 2260. I can't remember which. It's 2259. Will remove that from statute and put it in the hands of the Early Learning Council. So it will be by rule, because we really, really don't want people to have fingerprints any more than every 5 years, which is what the federal requirement is, because of the cost. I mean, it's, you know, it's a lot higher cost than it was. The $3 check, you could get it done on everybody, but the FBI check it costs more.
Yeah, significantly more. I've heard from a number of places, not just my family child care providers, but even neighbors who work at centers, about the increased costs. But that's a conversation we can have later. Does anybody have any questions so far about the background and fingerprinting? Here's somebody rustling around.
I don't have a question. I wonder if it's worth, Kelly, you said the rules are going to be done soon, or the rules, the updated rules?
The temporary rules went to the Child Care and Education Committee last week and are being moved to the council for the meeting this month. So they are on the agenda for the council.
Has anybody talked about the cost as an equity issue as well? Because that's, I mean, well, and I think it's unclear about how much it's going to. I think the division doesn't really know how much it's going to cost, right? And
no,
I think
we've costed it out pretty thoroughly.
Okay, so
yeah.
I think that to the broader community, it's still not clear, because what I heard from a neighbor was completely inconsistent with what I'd heard at the council. And then the concern is that, you know, for hiring people, you know, specifically like substitutes and people who might be temporary or just occasional workers, they're being told that they have to pay $75 for a background check, and I thought that we landed on a much lower price. I mean, it's still significantly higher than $3, but you know, how we may be blocking the ability to hire even substitute teachers that have will have any training, you know, at
Yeah.
$15
so
an hour.
Yeah, so I could certainly tell you about the fee issues and how we came to where we are right now. And so we have a couple, we have in our Central Background Registry, we also do background checks for, we call it reciprocate, we have reciprocating agreements with some agencies. So, for example, the Metro Zoo. So volunteers and workers at the zoo are in our background registry. And since they are not child care providers, they pay for the full cost of a background check. So for them, it's $75 plus the fingerprinting fee to be in our background registry. When we cost it out, with it, there's an FBI fee, there's an Oregon State Police fee, and then there's the internal cost of actually running the checks. We were able to carve some funding out of our currently existing Child Care and Development Fund to help offset the cost of the background checks for the first 6 months. So right now, after January 28th, actually right now, starting January 1st, you go online, submit a background check, it costs $35. So you pay $35, and that is a subsidized fee. Then everyone pays the $12.50 fingerprint fee to LiveScan. So that's their fee for the capture. So we know that we have the funding for 6 months to subsidize the background checks at $35. But beyond June, we don't have the extra funding to do that. Occasionally, actually, most of the time, we're awarded additional discretionary dollars from the feds. And what we opted to do was use some of the discretionary funding to help subsidize the cost. We don't know moving forward after June 30th and the new budget year what we're going to be able to do to offset it any more than we have.
Okay, so if somebody's applying for a job just as a substitute, would that be considered as a child care provider and get the child care rate, or would they be considered more like a volunteer and pay the $75 plus the $12.50?
The volunteer rates that are affiliated, the volunteers who are associated with a child care provider are paying $35 right now.
Okay.
So the only people who are not paying $35 are the reciprocating agreements that we have, so they're contracts with the zoo. So any other volunteer, any substitute, any individual who is linked to a child care facility is paying the $35 fee.
Okay, plus the $12.50.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Not hearing any. Giving some people opportunity to get off mute. Okay, so I'll allow people to. So the temporary role this covers making sure that people who renewed within their time period or recent time period that wouldn't be expiring under the old law are recognized, and there's nothing else new. And then we have the documents that go over who should be in the CBR. Yes. So if anybody has any additional questions, they can just email me and I will compile them and we'll get them to you before our ELC meeting next week. Does that sound fair to everybody?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kelly.
You bet.
Thanks, Kelly.
Okay, I'm going to go off webcam here. But did you, Buddha, Joe Montana, you know. Good views, good views.
Excellent. All right. So now we are on to the quality principles. Did everybody, again,
let me just, Eva, may I interrupt you?
Yeah.
I see that Meredith Russell is on this call. Meredith, did you want to jump in with something about 211, or are you just listening in? She's still on mute. I just wanted to make sure. But if not, we can just keep moving forward. She may just be listening.
Okay. Do you have the quality principles that you can bring up on the screen, Carol?
I do. Hold on. Let me share. I realize now I'm not sharing my screen anymore. 1 second.
So Eva, when are we doing the 211?
So that was for just a written submission for today. But I do really want to have, I guess I've not been clear on what was happening, and I really appreciate what Carmen brought up earlier, so I don't want to neglect a needed conversation around that. But I also want to be mindful that we need to review these principles in time for our meeting next week with the ELC.
Yeah. If you guys recall, we went over time last meeting, and Margie couldn't talk about 211, and we asked her to put it off until this time, and if she would just submit it in writing, which she's done, and that was emailed to you, and it's also on the ELD website. That's just an update of how 211 is going. Margie's on leave, and she won't be back until February, so if you still want to have her in for conversation, we'll just have to set up a time, whether it's February or March, to have her come in and do some more 211 debriefing.
Sorry, I just realized I muted myself. Yeah, I do think that there are some things to talk about, and I did review the 211 document and had some questions, but also want to be mindful of, so if we have some time, maybe we can talk about that at the end. So for the quality principles, in the November Early Learning Council meeting, we had a review of quality principles, and it was determined by the council that recommendations on the principles should be taken to the committees, or the principles should be taken to the committees for recommendations to bring back at our meeting next week. So the principles are to guide the work of the Early Learning Council committees, as well as that across like all the work of the council. I think, Sue, am I right in saying that it started as a conversation around the QRS, but it's been decided to apply it across all work, correct?
Yes, yes, you're right, Eva. The council really wants to look at what are those sort of overarching principles that we should apply to all of the different arenas that we work in and all the different, our standing committees. And then obviously there will be others that may apply to specific instances, like the QRIS revision, the CCR&R. You know, there may well be other principles that apply, but these would be the overarching ones. And these are obviously very drafty, and we have not done the wordsmithing on them. Some of them can be combined probably into one, so they won't end up, there won't end up being 11. But at this point, we really want to get committee input on, you know, are we hitting the really key areas for the council to consider, and are any missing, or do we have some here that you think are not necessary or appropriate?
Great, thank you. So, well, I think they are pretty broad. I think that some of it ties to our charter too, which is nice. So each quality category, you'll see, as Sue said, that there are 11. And David quickly ordered them in a way that he, based on conversation with the Child Care and Education committee, kind of made sense. So do we have any thoughts or recommendations on quality category number 1, best interest of children and families? Okay. Are there anything that we would want to call out specifically around that?
This is Sue again, Eva,
Yeah.
and I'd love to get the committee's reaction to alternative language for that, which is it would be best interests of child are paramount. So it would be a focus on the child as opposed to children and families.
Right. So,
and why would we eliminate the families?
Yeah, I would like that.
I think, so I was going to summarize. So I think we could say that when we focus on the best interests of the child, you know, that usually encompasses supporting the family with what they need. Because if the family is getting what they need, the outcomes and the interests of the child will certainly be supported, or vice versa. Like if we're focused on best interest for the child, the family should be getting what they need. Is that what you're thinking, Sue?
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting in at least my experience in the early childhood arena, children and families is just, it's always the standard and it all rolls together. And perhaps, Joyce, that's where I think that was Joyce who was asking the question.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where we want to leave it. And I just didn't know if saying the best interests of the child are paramount, if that just kind of changes the focus or I don't know, makes us think about it a little differently or be more aware of it and the interconnection that Eva's talking about. So I just throw it out for discussion. I'm not recommending one or the other. I just wanted to see what people's reactions would be.
You have thoughts on that, Ms. Joyce?
Well, I always like to see things called out so that there's no question. So my preference would be I was comfortable with children and families. Yeah.
I think that I do like and families too. And I think that when I think about, you know, how it applies to my advocacy through my day job, right? You know, we talk about for child care, finding care that fits for families, you know, culturally, their work hours, and then, you know, we want to support providers that provide quality setting no matter what the hours that they are working. But I think that gets, I think if we don't call out families,
Right.
we solely focus on the child, that piece of the conversation of like getting what's best for families, therefore the child gets lost.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the input from both of you.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I agree that families need to be left in, because sometimes if the family isn't good, the child isn't good. And so if we aren't incorporating the needs of the family, the child is going to potentially suffer either way. And so we know that if mom, dad, or caregiver has what they need, the child will then more likely have what they need as well. So I think that the two need to be paired.
Yeah, hi, this is Sadie, and I would also just echo that, and I wanted to add just another perspective and around the importance of keeping family called out there. That I think that particularly as we think about cultural responsiveness, we really can't separate the child in the way we create or design service. We can't separate the child from the family, because often what might happen is that a notion of what is best for that child may come from a very mainstream dominant cultural view, and if we're not having the family drive that decision of what is best for the child, I think we run a lot of risk there.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
I'm taking notes for you, Eva, and I'll email this to you so you can take them with you for the next ELC meeting when you guys go through this.
Great, thank you. Great. Is everybody comfortable moving on to number 2, focus on supporting positive child development?
But Carol, aren't we saying we cannot separate child from family?
Oh, correct, sorry. I read it that way.
I typed it in that way, but it didn't come out right.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right, so thoughts on focus on supporting positive child development. Do we want to tweak the language in any way? Any thoughts on that one?
Is there any thought or space for potentially parental attachment in that space? I know we talk a lot about attached parent, children and parent attachment, and stable and attached families.
Yeah, stable and attached families. Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you talking around number 2, so focus on supporting positive child development?
Mm-hmm.
Through, do you want to call out specifically through stable and attached families, support it, or even
or something like stable and attached families regardless of composition, because I don't want it to come off as mom and dad, that has to be the way, but a stable and attached family in whatever way that constitutes that particular family, whether it's caregiver, whether it's whatever it is.
Oh, Carol, that to me seems so important that I would see that as a separate.
Well, that's interesting, yeah.
I mean, seriously, I think what you're stating is important, and it shouldn't be attached to anything else.
yeah, I mean, I know in legislation that's one of the things that is something that the Early Learning Council is charged with focusing on. So does it make sense to repeat that language in our principles too?
I don't think it would hurt.
Right.
I know we're trying to keep under a certain number of categories because they get out of control. So I wonder, in terms of that, could 3 and 4 be combined?
Well, this is Sue again. I think calling that out is really important, and maybe it becomes a quality category and other things fall under it. If you scroll down to number 9, where it talks about providers, caregivers, educators, obviously that includes parents. Best outcomes for children and families, maybe the stable and attached families becomes more of the guiding principle, and the competencies, resources, supports somehow falls under that or within that. So there are probably different places that can be called out. And I'm not sure you want to take the time, Eva, to figure that out right now.
Okay. So does anybody have any additional thoughts on focus on supporting positive child development? I just wonder if there's a way that one, it just maybe we need to stay broad with these because you don't want to get too nuanced, but
Yeah, we don't want to get too deep into the details, I'm guessing, because there will be more details to come. But
okay. So on your question about do we want to combine 3 and 4, I almost I think I prefer to keep them as separate because equity and access and allocation of resources, that's going to be a conversation around distribution of funding and what's available, right? And while I think that we always should focus on equity and access, well, I was at the National Women's Law Center Child Care Early Learning Conference last week, and it was kind of an impending sense of doom-a-thon. I'll just call it out. And so, like, our resources, our already very thin resources, are about to potentially become even more scarce. And so I think that I think it's worthwhile to call out equity and access and allocation of resources, and then what else, and then keep equity and practice and cultural practices, and I don't know what the rest of 4 should be cut off.
I think the word responsiveness was left off of cultural.
Because I think we can always do that without resources as a policy, and that we should keep it separate. Does that make sense?
I agree. I don't see that we need to change that or add it or combine it with something else. It needs to be a very strong statement, access and allocation of resources, and just leave it as is.
So I do like that you're pulling in our furthest from opportunity language there, Carol. Thank you.
Yeah, just a couple little edits to help expand or clarify those two.
Yeah. Does anybody else have some thoughts on those two?
We're talking about 3 and 4?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Carol, can you read that one to me?
Oh, yes, ma'am. Okay, so number 3 originally was equity in access and allocation of resources. I just offered an edit that says equity and access to and allocation of resources to populations furthest from opportunity. Number 4 is originally equity in practices and cultural. I think there was a word left off there. The edit was equity in culturally responsive practice and policy implementation.
Yes. Okay.
Good too. All right, is everybody comfortable with moving on to number 5?
Yeah.
commitment to continuous improvement.
Yes.
I was just curious, continuous improvement for whom? The educator or the kids and families?
Right. I think that's, I would like, that's certainly something. I think continuous improvement, but I'm also wondering,
I think the intent was that we're getting into sort of the professional development, you know, and standards of care in some of these next principles. So I'm quite sure in my conversations with David, this was focused on PD. And because that's where this language shows up in several of the council and division documents. But obviously, all of these are very abbreviated in their wording.
Right. So I'm wondering.
And that is the problem. I think once you said exactly what this meant, then because the way it looks like commitment to continuous improvement, that didn't really. I mean, how do you measure that? How do you? So it just seems like it needs some language, some additional language.
Yeah. And I think to go back to meeting needs and being conscious of settings and you know, culturally appropriate settings that meet the family's needs too, like commitment to continuous professional development for early learning providers that matches the need of the type of setting, so that we're always conscious of like what works for centers might not work for a licensed exempt or whatever we're calling them now. Sorry.
Okay, so draft edit, commitment to continuous professional development for early learning providers that reflects the needs of the early learning environment. I can actually just say the needs of the environment because that's too many early learnings in one sentence.
Carmen, are you on? I think that does that make sense from a?
I am here. Sorry, I woke up with a nasty head cold, so I'm, you know, at 50% or something.
That's right.
That's okay. No problem.
I wanted to get your opinion as a professional development specialist.
Yeah. No, I liked what you just wrote and then read off.
Okay.
Katie, do you have any?
I think that reflects the needs of the environment is good, because I think it's hard for us to all remember that they're so varied.
Yeah.
Carol, this is Sue. I have a question for you based on the QRIS discussion and presentation that you made at the council meeting. Are we trying to walk away from the word providers and put educators in instead? Or did I misunderstand that part of Spark?
We can't, no, the part of Spark is, it's, you know, part of it is, as all good marketing is, aspirational. And so there are some providers who love the idea of being called educators and embrace that. And in our external work, folks are really celebratory of that. Some don't. Some feel like, no, you know, I'm a child care provider. I don't see myself as that. So part of the marketing is aspirational, and it's also public-facing, so to get folks to understand, people in public to understand that we consider early learning professionals to also be educators, because we're getting them, they're building brains for kids to be ready for kindergarten. That said, it's still kind of an interchangeable term. I'm a fan of the projecting of the educator term. Some others aren't, so that's just flexible. But as far as the Spark marketing piece goes, we're going to keep using educator to continue to sort of reinforce that language that early learning providers are professionals. If that makes sense. I know it's wordplay, but it's the tool to continue to help enhance that idea of early learning folks as professionals.
Right, and so my question is, do you think we should be using educators instead of providers, or providers/educators, or just leave it at providers?
I would love to use educators. I honestly, I would feel more comfortable making sure Dawn Woods was okay with that, since she's leading the process of revision. But I prefer educators because I think it adds the gravitas that's needed as we continue to elevate this work.
This is Carmen. I think that my sense of it, or the discussions I've been in, I feel like adding early learning to the before provider is how we've sort of gotten around the fact that some people do not view themselves as educators, but that taking out childhood and making it learning addresses the fact that many people do view themselves as educators and they are providing a learning experience and environment. And I'm not saying to not move forward and to calling people educators, I'm just clarifying where I think that came from.
You're absolutely right, and I know that a lot of folks felt, you're right, more comfortable calling themselves educators because they threw in the early learning, or the early in front of that. I know that some elementary teachers were, you know, a little bit like, what do you mean you're calling yourselves educators? Sort of a little territorial on that, but I like calling them educators. They're educating our kids. Like, that's what they are. So,
but I think the other issue with that, though, is if you throw the educator term out there, it begins to raise the question of credentialing and all other kinds of things. And I could see where the elementary educators would be a little concerned about that, because they are required to, you know, get certain levels of credentials that the other ones aren't. So I'm a little nervous about using the term educator.
Well, I think for providers, they see it as intimidating too, and they see it as a move toward requiring them to attain higher degrees of education that are really not possible for them. You know, they don't see it as possible for them to go back to school to get a BA, or, you know, it goes back to a lot of the conversations that we've had around preschool promise as well. So I think, you know, I'm fine with saying providers/educators because it does get to that full spectrum of, you know, where people are, but it doesn't exclude.
Yeah, and this is Sue. The other thing I'd say, and I'm agreeing with the providers, use of providers, because these principles obviously apply across everything that the council does, which includes significant home visiting programs. So we need to, you know, keep in mind that these are very broad principles.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's just for, it's 10:30, so I want to make sure we can get through these other 5 and keep having the good philosophical discussion of providers versus educators. So Eva, number 6, is commitment to research-based best practices.
I think we have language in our charter that reflects that too. Does anybody want to add anything to that or tweak it in any way?
I don't really need to add anything. I'm really glad it's on there.
This is Sue again, and I'd really be interested in committee members' thoughts about this one, because I've certainly heard from some arenas that if we really focus on research-based best practices, we may well be leaving out some, newly developing, especially culturally responsive approaches to this whole early learning arena. So I'm just wondering how comfortable people are with saying it's research-based best practices, because that obviously narrows the field by definition.
Well,
yeah, thanks for, oh, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one of the terms that we often use, are using now, is promising best practices. And that way, that doesn't lock you into the so-called research-based things. If you just say promising best practices, and if you look at out of the Institute for and they did several briefs where they looked at the research-based best practices, and they looked at programs, and some of the things were research-based, others weren't, but they were promising. So they kind of changed their language a little bit because they realized that, there's some things that are working, but they have not met the criteria of quote-unquote research-based. So using promising best practices has become somewhat acceptable. And you're right, especially with the cultural responsive practices, some of the promising practices just have not even been around long enough to be to go through the test of research.
Right, so. Exactly. That's exactly right, Joyce.
And this is Sadie. I wanted to also offer another term that is also gaining traction, which is practice-based evidence as opposed to evidence-based practice. And in a lot of culturally specific organizations are able to point to what we've learned from implementing our work in our culturally specific approaches and the evidence that comes out of that. So there may be a way to, I like promising, as Ms. Joyce recommended, and I also think it's important to hold up that there is evidence to support culturally specific work, and that it may not be, evidence-based with a capital letter.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So I plugged in both Sadie and Ms. Joyce's edits, and I'll leave them like that, Eva, so you can you can describe them at the meeting.
Great, thank you. Is everybody comfortable with moving on to 7, data-driven decision-making and accountability for measurable outcomes for children and families?
Yep, let's do it.
So,
this one seems pretty solid.
I don't know. I always struggle with measurable outcomes. I mean, I guess we have some. Yeah, I'm happy to hear your thoughts. I don't have a coherent thought on this, I guess. I guess my question is, do our measurable outcomes go back and consider what is how we're meeting the need of the families and the children that we're supporting. So I guess it's to say, you know, do we have these measurable outcomes that we're held accountable for that are attainable, or are they just so broad and generic that many families would still not be able to meet those? I think this is the question I still struggle with even after years of doing this, and so somebody can set me straight or provide language.
Eva, this is Sue again, and you know, I think for the council, this is such a core value that we have, and I've seen it just in numerous documents. So it seems to me the issue you're raising is one that we really need to look at with the Measuring Success Committee that the council has, that David is kind of the interim chair of, and have them really tackle that and look at that, and then obviously come back and let the Equity Committee also take a look at what they're pursuing and evaluating. But I don't think this is going to be the place where we're going to be able to address what you're talking about, but it will be folded into Measuring Success as I see it.
Okay. Anybody else have thoughts on that, or should we move on to number 8? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on to number 8. Thank you, Sue. Parent voice and roles are respected, enlisted, and included. Would it make sense to pull our language from our charter about did I lose people?
No, I just think we don't know. We don't know. I think this is a great, I mean, this is a great quality principle, and probably, you know, will probably be a little expanded at your meeting, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, my question is, included in what? And included in what? Included in the policies, practices. I mean, it just seems like that's a dangling phrase, you know, included.
Right.
And I guess how will they be included too?
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything on that? I think those are kind of the questions I had. You ready to move on to number 9?
Can I just ask Carol, one word that I thought about was incorporated, and incorporated into policy, practice, whatever, you know.
Yes, I like that. Thank you.
I don't know how that happened. Okay.
Any other thoughts, or should we move on to 9?
Yep, let's do it. We've got about 15 minutes to go.
So I'm wondering if number 9 doesn't fit in with the our revamped number 5. If we
Yeah, if we just threw it on the end of number 5 and best supports outcomes for kids and families, it could essentially be 1.
Right.
Like if we change number 5 to commitment to provide continuous professional development for early learning providers that reflects the needs of the environment and best support outcomes for children, families. That sort of gets it.
yeah.
I think the one piece that's perhaps left out is the resources. And maybe I was just reading into resources that it's related to funding.
Well, I guess in my mind, professional development, yeah, commitment to I mean, do we have definitions anywhere that define, that give it, well, I don't know if this gets to the resources question, but
Definitions of what resource means.
or what professional, because I think professional development does include competencies, but resources is a different question.
There may be definitions on hand. I don't have a one that reflects professional development. Just working with what we usually say professional development is, which is professional development for providers.
And maybe we'll want to, relook at number 3, which is where we talk about resources, and make sure that we're being inclusive of this provider statement.
I think that makes sense. Any other thoughts on that? Carol, do you mind making a note to, okay. Oh, I see, you're putting it up there. I was looking at 9. Sorry.
That's okay. I just want to make sure we did that on the equity piece, and then we will come over here. Okay. The spirit is there. You know what's happening. Okay.
Yeah.
And then in your further conversations about potentially merging 9 and 5. So that note is there.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so number 10, collaboration, alignment, and coordination across sectors and programs. I'm wondering if there's a way, because I like this and I think it makes sense, what I sometimes, in some of my conversations across different programs, is that I wonder if there's a way to be clear that collaboration, alignment, and coordination doesn't become parents and providers need to shuffle kids between programs, but like there, I don't know, maybe that still gets to the number, that gets to, you know, number one covers that without.
Number 10 to me just sounds like sort of government speak for work together.
Right.
So maybe that is the thing, is something about working together across, let's see. Okay, let me think what I can.
I just think about like the families that, you know, in trying to make life work, or, you know, based on resources, they might take their kid to one setting for the early portion of the morning because they work like a first shift job, first shift job, and so they have to get there fairly early, and then the child gets shuffled to another program because, you know, the family's resources dictate that it makes more sense financially that they go to two different programs, but for the child, that's, you know, a disjointed kind of day. So, and I mean, and maybe that's just the way things will be, but.
You know, I think it's this cross-sector coordination that's really a key part of this one for the council, at a council level as opposed to a child care level.
Right.
Because our third goal and mandate is that we're going to put a system together. Right. And to have a system, we've got to pull these sectors together. So for me, that number 10 is that really bigger conversation about how are we working with healthcare and K-12 and, you know, the sectors.
So can we call out specifically what we're talking about there instead? You know, because I think when I think it gets jumbled when you say programs, and I don't want to, you know, I'm not.
So maybe we take out programs and just let it be sectors.
I sort of lean towards calling out specific organizations because outside of government world, nobody sort of knows what cross sectors means. I mean, I think I tend to think that plain English leads to more credibility.
Yeah.
So I'm just making these notes. Again, these are obviously not going to be permanent, but just something when you guys are in the conversation in a couple of weeks so that you're able to remember and refer back.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you, Eva, that 1 and 10 should probably be together because then it sort of dictates what happens through the rest of the quality if we're working down a list. Collaboration leads to the best parts of the rest of them.
Yeah.
I agree. I like the possible combination of 1 and 10.
Yeah.
To provide the best outcomes of children and families. You know, all that other stuff. collaboration, alignment, coordination across organizations and programs. Yeah.
You just say work together across internal, external programs, cross sectors to meet the needs and support meet the needs of children and families and support best outcomes for them or something to that. I don't know, just so that that doesn't get lost, that we're not just focused on the outcomes, but that we're meeting their needs.
Right. All right. I think it's caught the spirit so that you're able to keep fleshing it out. Okay.
Everyone good? We're going to the last one in our last 8 minutes. Transparency and public involvement. I mean, yeah, it's broad, but maybe we just flesh out a little bit.
All right.
Anybody else have thoughts on that one?
I think that looks good, Eva.
All right. So
we did it.
Yay, we did that. Whew. So
so I'll email this just to you, Eva, for your meeting.
Yeah. And then if anybody has any additional thoughts, feel free to email me. And then on the 211, if anybody has some thoughts on that, I think it's worth a conversation. So Carmen, some of those things are, if there are any other thoughts, so I apologize for my last minute cobbling together of everything, and I appreciate everybody being here. Does anybody else have some last thoughts?
You did a great job. This is a great meeting.
Thanks. Thanks for pulling together the charter, too.
No problem.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, so everybody stay safe and feel better and get warm or stay warm. And hopefully our winter will become normal soon.
Okay, you take care too, Eva.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Okay, bye-bye.